and welcome to the Brothers' War. This is Casus Belli Episode 2, where we will add more wood to the Tinderbox as we discuss the Compromise of 1850. Last time, we gave an introduction to 19th century politics, described the main political parties, and gave a rundown of the debates around disunion, states' rights, and slavery in the territories. Today, we will be telling another story, albeit one strikingly similar. In 1848, the Mexican-American War ended, and the United States now finally stretched from sea to shining sea unbroken. A massive amount of land had once again been very suddenly added to the United States, called the Mexican Cession, so we're going to need to get rid of this map and replace it with this map. The primary issue facing Congress was the settling of the question of slavery and borders in lands acquired from Mexico per the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. But currently, before they could even get to that point, the House was in a deadlock over the question of who to elect as Speaker of the House. Also, as an administrative note, the Free Soil Party is now participating in elections, but like I said last time, they will remain marginal until the Whigs start to collapse. It holds just 2 seats in the Senate and 10 in the House. The Federalists are gone, but their platform is now represented by the Whigs. The Democratic Republicans are now just the Democrats, and likewise represent the same decentralized states' rights agenda. The Know-Nothings are currently still operating as a secret society, not yet as a political party. While Congress argued, California had boomed in the gold rush of '49 and had become incredibly profitable and incredibly populous in quite a short period of time, and had already submitted an appeal to statehood with a constitution that outlawed slavery. Utah had been primarily settled by Mormons, and a Free Soil group had settled in New Mexico. They declared overlapping borders, leading to a situation that could not be resolved by the two parties, since neither of these settlers had any effective government at this point. In yet another crisis, Texas in the wake of the war had claimed a frankly absurd amount of territory and was threatening armed conflict with the people of New Mexico. On December 13th, 1849, there was a lot of inflamed finger-pointing going on in the House on the subject of a speaker. Things were in a heated deadlock. There was nobody whom enough people could agree on to take the office of Speaker of the House. Nobody could win a majority, when William Dewar, a Whig from New York, made an impassioned plea that some kind of compromise between Whigs and Democrats was necessary. He promised that he would work with anyone to do so, provided that he was not a disunionist. At which point, a Virginia Democrat loudly proclaimed, "There are no disunionists in this House." Dewar then directly pointed at a different Virginia Democrat, Richard Meade, and proclaimed Meade a disunionist. Meade denied this. Dewar called him a liar, and the House exploded in accusations, labeling, and threats, and a heated debate on the subject of disunion broke out, whether or not it was legal, what would happen, or if it was even likely. Georgian Whig Robert Toombs then took the floor and shocked everybody when he announced in the face of the world, citing the Northern Aggression Conspiracy Theory, that if the North sought to drive us from the territories of California and New Mexico, purchased by the common blood and treasure of the whole people, and to abolish slavery in this district, thereby attempting to fix a national degradation upon the South, then I am for disunion. The effect on the House was explosive. Toombs met with thunderous applause from the Southerners, Democrat and Whig alike. Toombs and the Southerners had made it clear that Northern aggression would be met with disunion. But the Northerners did not take this very seriously. They thought it just Southern bluster. But this time, the Southerners were in fact serious. This new Southern United Front held a majority, then quickly elected Howell Cobb, Democrat from Georgia, as Speaker of the House. The recently elected President Taylor, Southern Whig, gave the State of the Union address in December 1849 and presented a plan to solve these issues by admitting both California as a free state and New Mexico as a state, with the slavery question to be settled by popular sovereignty. Now, popular sovereignty is the idea that the citizens of a certain territory or state should make the decision whether or not to be slave or free, not the state government, and certainly not the federal government. On the far left, the Free Soiler Party disliked this approach because of popular sovereignty in New Mexico. They didn't like that he was even willing to consider slavery there. They thought it was pointless and kind of absurd because there were no slaves in New Mexico. Mexico had outlawed slavery in 1829. Why not just admit New Mexico as a free state? On the extreme right, the Southern Democrats and about half of the Southern Whigs, such as the Firebrand Toombs, were furious about the admission of California as a free state, even though, much like New Mexico, there were no slaves in California and had been none for 21 years. Clingman, a North Carolina Whig, said that if California were admitted as a free state, the condition of the South would become that of Saint-Domingue. That is, they'd suffer a bloody slave revolution. This was tailored to the fears of his plantation owner constituency, as a revolution a la Haiti was the number one thing that kept these slavers up at night. In the center, we have those in favor of the compromise and would very much like to hear all talk of disunion cease as soon as possible. We've got the Northern Whigs here in the middle, and that other half of the Southern Whigs. This leaves us the Northern Democrats, who are in the center and in favor of admission of California for economic purposes, but were a little ticked that Taylor had stolen the idea of popular sovereignty from them, which was their Democratic, not Whig, party platform. With division like this, Taylor's plan would never pass. Enter Henry Clay. Once more, now an old man, who tried to solve all these problems in a single bill introduced on January 29, 1850 with 8 proposals which were, number 1, California be admitted as a free state. Number 2, Texas behave itself and give that land back to New Mexico right away, please. Number 3, the Fed will assume Texas's public debt in order to balance the loss of revenue from these new lands. Number 4, slave auctions be abolished in D.C., but the practice of slavery continue. Free scholars have been pushing for abolition in D.C. for a while now, since D.C. was the only place in the United States the federal government had direct jurisdiction over, no state government in the middle. Number 5, Congress declared it has no power to interfere with the slave trade in the states, only D.C. Number 6, that the fugitive slave law be strengthened. And number 7, that the territories in the Mexican cession will have no conditions or restrictions on slavery. In light of the fact that the Mexicans had actually abolished slavery 21 years ago, this would in effect cause the Mexican cession territories to be neither slave nor free. The idea behind this is that it would lay the groundwork for Utah and New Mexico to become free territories and free states later on, barring any spread of slavery into these territories, which was not allowed. Number 8, setting borders for the territories of Utah and New Mexico. Clay received numerous plaudits for this and was praised as the savior of the Union, and was claimed that he had satisfied all parties once again in his classic Henry Clay fashion by both the media and certain members of Congress. However, the reality of the matter was that the Free Soilers and abolitionists were hoping for total abolition in D.C. and a prohibition of slavery in all territories. They were also incensed at the idea of any expansion of the highly controversial fugitive slave law. The Southern Democrats were also unhappy. It was seen as a capitulation to the anti-slavery North. As soon as Clay sat down after reading this list, Southern senators immediately jumped to their feet, declaring that this was an outrageous injustice to the South. They rejected the Free California, they rejected the new Texas border, they rejected the support for the existing anti-slavery laws in the Mexican cession. A week later, various senators were already hard at work amending, reframing, and reworking the piece of legislation, and wouldn't you know, there's a heated discussion of disunion over the subject, to the extent that a petition of citizens from Pennsylvania and Delaware, northern states, was brought before the Congress advocating for peaceful dissolution of the Union. A petition which was matched identically by another from North Carolina. Petitions which came to nothing. Congress has no jurisdiction to dissolve the Union, no matter who you ask, but serves as a weather gauge for the feelings in the country. There were heated feelings not just in Congress, but across the country, north and south, on the matter of disunion. Despite all the petitions, there are those who looked to Europe, freshly in the wake of the 1848 revolutions, and said, "You want that, huh? You want 31 small countries constantly at war with each other, facing tumult, nationalism, aristocracy, religious conflict, political conflict, and socialism? That's what you want?" Socialism was mostly unknown in the United States, but was a rising force in Western Europe in the 50s. Southern Unionists also played on this fear by saying, "Slavery is the only thing we have keeping us nice and conservative and suppressing all the revolutionary bloodletting." And so pro- and anti-disunion voices went on, back and forth in editorials, taverns, city halls, dining rooms, and legislatures across the country. Enter Daniel Webster, Whig from Massachusetts, who gave a speech on March 7th, giving a rebuttal to calls for abolition and secession. Webster's fine oratory called out both the abolitionists and the secessionists for dividing the country and placing themselves as the protagonists to save the Union. He spoke in favor of the Southerners' complaints against the Northerners, and stated plainly the North had to honor its commitment to capture fugitive slaves. He explicitly said, "The South is right and the North is wrong," and that the onus was on the North to temper passions. Finally, he criticized peaceful secession, directing this squarely at both the militant and peaceful secessionists. He declared them fanatics and posed a series of questions in an exercise in rhetoric. A voluntary separation. Why? What would be the result? Where is the line to be drawn? What states are to secede? What is to remain American? What am I to be, an American no longer? Where is the flag of the Republic to remain? To Webster, any secession would end in violence. Webster's appeal to rationality and pragmatism was a home run. Northerners, both Democrats and Whigs, all publicly rallied in support of Webster's appeal, along with seemingly the entire northern upper and middle classes. Southern newspapers joined the wave of support, praising his courage and desire for compromise and mediation. There would be no secession today. Abolitionists, of course, despised it, and William Seward, Whig from New York, rejected the very idea that any concession was necessary for the admission of California as a free state, pointing out the absurdity of the fact that, once again, there were no slaves in California. But, aside from pragmatism, Seward's whole brand of anti-slavery views were based on his capital I idealistic interpretation of the founders' intentions. He stated, "Slavery is temporary, accidental, partial, and incongruous. Freedom is perpetual, organic, and in harmony with the Constitution of the United States." Seward's perspective was that political freedom derives not from the Constitution, but existed in God's nature, and was merely expressed in the Constitution, that the Constitution was the temporary means by which the people attained freedom, and the actual specific letter of the law in the Constitution was not nearly as important as the attainment of liberty. He was always a servant of what he called the higher law than the Constitution, and was thus compelled to oppose slavery and extend liberty. Seward concurred with Webster's assessment that there existed no peaceful dissolution. He stated that disunion will and must be a revolution. However, at the same time, he does not really take the Southern threat of disunion seriously, ascribing it to overexcitement and hunger for power. He said that the onus was on the South for returning to normalcy and diffusing tension by freeing the slaves. The alternative was war. A war that Seward assessed the South would lose. Seward's almost prophetic words would be completely rejected and derided by all parties. On May 8th, Clay would present a reworked version of the compromise composed of 3 bills. One bill, strengthening the Fugitive Slave Act, balanced by another bill illegalizing slave auctions in D.C., combined with a third omnibus bill on the Mexican cession, settling a larger share to Texas, and therefore to slavery, than previously. The borders for the New Mexico and Utah territories were settled, and the slavery question in those territories would be resolved by popular sovereignty. California would then be admitted as a free state. The Northern Whigs and Southern Democrats both rejected it, and at this moment we almost have the two polar opposite camps agreeing on something, when the Southern Democrats proposed extending the 1820 Missouri Compromise line westwards through the Mexican cession, which broke this coalition before its birth. And without these two blocs, the May 8th bills will be dead in the water. Southerners, Whig and Democrat alike, put their faith in a convention assembling at Nashville that June to unite the southern wings of the parties into one indomitable Southern bloc that would have the majority in the House and the Senate. The point of this convention was to make the North feel like it could not survive without the South, and therefore win concessions for the South. It was at this convention that the concept of a Southern Confederation would first be conceived, primarily as a rhetorical weapon to wield against the North in favor of gaining concessions, namely slavery in the territories. They weren't all secessionists, of course. The only real objective was to build a bloc of Southern votes as a big tent. Some felt that the abolitionists were the only real disunionists for refusing to acknowledge that slavery was constitutional. Regardless, it is at this constitution that we really see new Southern nationalism first take root. However, seeing this open talk of secession and disunion and Southern Confederation de-radicalized a significant number of Southern Whigs who really were persuaded by Clay's compromise. Some of them really thought it was good enough. Threatening to split the convention and the Southern vote, Southern Democrats pushed aside all talk of secession in favor of a real Southern United Front to achieve their goals. The convention voted in favor of a Southern platform including an extension of the Missouri Compromise line westwards across the Mexican cession. However, this seemingly weak approach to the expansion of slavery lost the support of those original Southern Democrats who called the convention, and with both the radical and moderate wings disillusioned, combining with growing public opinion that the Southern Democrats were attempting to hijack the Democratic Party, the Nashville Convention eventually dissolved in favor of passing the May 8th Compromise. For the Southerners, the commitment of the federal government to not interfere with slavery in the territories was satisfactory. The bills passed the House and the Senate and were sent to the White House, where President Taylor vetoed the bills in favor of his own original plan from the 1849 State of the Union address, citing the Texas-New Mexico border issue, and then he died. No, seriously, he died of an intestinal ailment and was replaced by New York Whig Millard Fillmore, who was all too happy to besmirch Taylor's memory, and to prevent a shooting war over the New Mexico-Texas border, he totally replaced his cabinet with men in favor of compromise. Any compromise, and Fillmore signaled to the legislature his intention to accept a new compromise. However, while this is happening, tensions in the legislature would flare again on the subject and the May 8th compromise would die, since there was no way anyone could drum up the 2/3 vote necessary to overturn Taylor's veto or propose a new compromise. Enter Stephen Douglas, Illinois Democrat, the debater. Douglas was unimpressed with the record of the omnibus bills, trying to pass all these broad changes in one piece of legislation, and broke it up into various smaller bills, all in the name of popular sovereignty. And if you take nothing else away from this, remember that Stephen Douglas is in favor of popular sovereignty always and always. His new Texas bill would grant Texas a $5 million indemnity if it would yield up the claim to the New Mexican land. The measure passed the Senate. The North having yielded, Douglas leapt on this momentum and was able to pass California statehood as a free state, borders for New Mexico, borders for Utah, the principle of popular sovereignty for these new territories, strengthening the Fugitive Slave Act and ending the slave trade in D.C., all as individual pieces of legislation. They passed the Senate, and by September had passed in the House and were subsequently signed into law by President Fillmore. Now, at this point, I need to go further in depth about the fugitive slave law. It will become very important later on. The origin of fugitive slave law in the United States comes from the Constitution, which states that no person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall in consequence of any law or regulation therein be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on the claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. This means that if a slave escaped from a slave state and successfully made it to a free state, they would still be considered a fugitive in that free state and would have to be returned to slavery. The slave catchers had the authority to pass state lines and capture them, no matter where they were in the country, and anyone helping the escaping slave would be subject to a $500 fine. That's almost $16,000 today. But if you were clever, and if you maybe had some help from the Underground Railroad, you could forge manumission documents and live in freedom in the northern Midwest somewhere. It could be done. The new compromise law strengthened this even further by increasing the fine to $1,000 and adding the compulsion for law enforcement everywhere in the country to aid the slave catchers, denying habeas corpus for the slave, legislating that no jury was permitted, and that the accused could not even testify in court. This enraged the abolitionists, and Harriet Beecher Stowe would write and publish Uncle Tom's Cabin specifically in protest of the law. Some very brave and very heroic abolitionists like Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, and John Brown would openly defy the law on numerous occasions, and in reality had been doing so for quite some time, and the Underground Railroad would be extended north into Canada, which was now the nearest safe place for runaways. The abolitionists are now developing a highly militant wing. Unlike the Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850 will receive comparatively little praise in the legislature. Senator Salmon Chase of Ohio, the leader of the Free Soil Party, noted, "The question of slavery in the territories has been avoided. It has not been settled." Historian William Freeling would describe it as not so much a compromise as an armistice. But the talk of disunion had subsided, for now. The Unionist Southerners managed to portray their opponents as secessionists, and this would follow them around for a while, but not forever. The tinderbox of America was very full and very, very dry. All it would take was one spark, and join me next time when we will see that spark, the Kansas-Nebraska